lot of records out there, really.
There are so many records, and when I started 30 years ago, I didn't have the access to all of the records that are now available, either online or that have just been brought to the light so that you can go and travel to the repository where they are and see those records.
Okay.
So our ancestors are everywhere, and it's just a matter of us knowing how to go and find them.
Just how to know. What do you have there? I see you're starting with estate records. Okay, so when you
Yes.
say estate, you're talking about the estate of an enslaver.
Most of the time,
Most
yes.
of the time.
And
Okay.
so you can find our ancestors in various parts of estate records, and what we have here is an inventory. And so, of course, an estate has to be inventory for all of the personal property of the deceased person. And so I use this slide in one of my talks to show people that they should always read every document from the top to the bottom, from corner to corner. Don't leave anything out. Don't think, oh, I'm looking at an inventory, so I'm just looking for a list. Because you see on this document, there's a list at the bottom, but there's a big old paragraph at the top. So if you were only looking for the list, you would miss this part of the inventory where it says 31 Negroes of the following names, and then it names every single one of those enslaved persons, Abram, Bob, Moses, and so on.
And those are some of the names that are there. 31. So this means this enslaver had at least 31 slaves.
Yes, and this just happens to be the brother of, excuse me, not the brother, the son of my great-grandfather's first owner.
Oh, wow. Okay, the son of your great-grandfather's
first owner. So when you do find who enslaved your family, you don't have to just research them. You have to research their entire family, their friends, their neighbors, anyone who was interacting with them, because that's where you may find other records pertaining to your ancestor. Like I mentioned to you a minute ago about enslaved persons being hired. And so it's possible that my great-grandfather's enslaver could have hired him out to another family member or a neighbor for certain types of labor, like, you know, maybe pulling in the crop, whether it be cotton or corn or tobacco or whatever. Maybe they needed extra hands, and so she was able to hire my ancestor out, and that's a record I would want to find. So wills are also, of course, part of an estate record, and again, my advice is always to read every single word from the top of the page to the bottom of the page. And so here, the highlighted portions just show you where this person, and this is a random record I have no connection to. This record is from Alabama, from Talladega County, and you can see that she leaves to her beloved son Matthew, her Negro man Albert, and her Negro girl Ann. And so if you're looking for an Albert or an Ann, of course there's more to it, but if you know that your Albert is, you know, connected to this, maybe his name is Albert Chipman, you know, maybe he took this person's last name, it's just a clue. I mean, you have to, everything you find in a record, you have to then find other records to support it so that you can verify that this is the person you're looking for. Again, she leaves to her next son, Edwin, her Negro man named Isaac. So this is just another thing you don't want to overlook. You always want to read every will, every word from top to the bottom and corner to corner, as I like to say. This just has to do with the importance of oral history. If your family has any oral history, it's likely that it's not 100% true now. A year, 100 years, 200 years later, it's like playing the telephone game. You know, you start at one end of the room, and by the time it gets to the other end of the room, some of the details have changed. And that's how oral history is also. But there's usually at least a grain of truth in it. And so what's on this slide is also just an example I use of an excerpt from Ella Baker and the Black Freedom Movement. Ella Josephine Baker, the famed civil rights worker, was actually a cousin of mine, which I didn't know until I did the research, and there she was in my family tree. But she, in this book that's written by and about her life, she mentions that her grandfather and some of his family members purchased land from their former enslaver. And I found the records of those purchases. So even though she didn't, everything in her oral history was not exactly correct, I was able to verify that they did purchase this land from William D. Elam's, and my third great grandfather was the brother of her grandfather, and they're both shown right here, Mitchell Ross and Everett Ross, and they're both also shown over here on this document making the final payment. And what's interesting about that is that family still lives on the land right now in Warren County, North Carolina.
Amazing.
They sure do.
Wow.
They sure do.
Ah.
So, as you can see, it's sometimes the records are not just about the person that we're looking for. They're about something or someone totally different, but our ancestors are part of the record, and that's why it's so important not to overlook anything or pass anything off and say, oh no, they won't be in there, because they will be. There's so many things.
Yeah. And it just takes a lot of patience and just, staying in the weeds.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of those weeds, one of the things you may encounter would be name changes. So that's another one of the tricky parts of African American research. Around the time of emancipation, enslaved persons or formerly enslaved persons may be going by one name. They may give a certain surname the first time they're ever asked because they hadn't really thought about it, and a census taker comes in 1870 and says, what's your first name, what's your last name? Maybe they hadn't thought about it. So they would give a certain last name, but then as a family they may decide to change that surname, and you may find them in 1880 and with a totally different surname. The same would be true if you find an ancestor in Freedmen's Bureau records, which were established, right at the end of the Civil War, and between 1865 and 1870, the 1870 census, or 1872 when the Freedmen's Bureau was closed. They may have been using one name, but then decided on another name, and so you could find them in Freedmen's Bureau records one way and then find them later another way. Our ancestors show up in the little corners of the earth that you may not expect. This is a list of slaves and free persons of color received in the penitentiary of Virginia for sale and transportation. And so these are actually people who have been arrested for one reason or another, being held in the jail. This is in 1842, and many of them will end up being deported, if you want to call it that, to Liberia through the American Colonization Society. Others will actually be sold, as it says here that they will be, but that's why it says sale and transportation, because some are going to Liberia and some are going to be sold here domestically. And they also, give you little notes about some of them, like it shows that someone died here and it gives the date of their death, same here. And so this could be news to your family. There's nowhere else you may have found an actual death date for this enslaved person or free person of color, because this is well before governments began recording and requiring death certificates. So this is just a way that you can find an actual, they have that person's age here, they have the date that it's happening, and then the date for these couple of people that they actually died before they were sold or deported.
And if they had family, in Virginia still, they're sent to Liberia, they become permanently separated.
In most cases, some of the persons who went to Liberia did come back after emancipation, but yes, in a lot of cases it's a permanent separation. But what you find in the records is evidence that the enslaved persons went through all the rituals of that denomination that the white people. So if there are baptisms, they're being baptized, they have to profess their faith just as we would. In the Catholic churches, they do the infant and young child baptisms, just like for the white people, and there are records of that. And also the moral connection of the church is different back in the 1800s, 1700s, and before that. You know, the church has a lot of say-so in your life, and so whatever the church resolutions and restrictions are, like you're not supposed to drink or there's no fornication or whatever, those apply to enslaved people and free people of color also. And so you'll also find in the church records where persons of color are being brought before the deacons and being excommunicated from the church because they stole something or they fornicated, or, you know, same things as the white people. So again, for us, this is a way we can find our ancestors. We can put them in a place and time.